So thank you so much for joining us again in one of our NASCO Live webinar series. We're really excited to talk to you today about knives and how to use knives in your classroom, doing some hands-on demonstrations. So the first thing I want to do is thank you all for tuning in to learn more about knives, especially with an expert like Chris Parker, who I feel we're really, really lucky to have online. It's clear in all the work we've done that he knows his stuff. So I'm excited to connect you with him for these demonstrations today. Just to let you know, this is part of an ongoing webinar series that NASCO puts on. We do a couple webinars each month. About every other month, we focus on a family and consumer sciences topic. So if this is your first webinar, we would love to see you again in a couple months when we feature another FCS one. So make sure that you kind of keep an eye on those emails coming in because we have a number of really great cross-curricular webinars that NASCO puts on as part of our solutions mentality. That as a company, we want to try and equip our teachers for success and have you listen to you and provide some solutions for the challenges that we're seeing in this unprecedented time. So thank you for spending time that I know is incredibly valuable and incredibly short, as many teachers are just getting back into the classroom or gearing up for the start of the school year. So the one thing I did want to address as well is this webinar is amazing and unique because we're also doing a bit of a drawing with the survey at the end of the webinar. So if you stay through the whole webinar, a survey will launch at the end. And courtesy of Mercer Culinary, who Chris works with and is our partner today, we will be giving away about 50 posters and a survey for the attendees. So if you fill out that survey, we'll do a drawing from there, and then by the end of the month, hopefully get you a free poster. And there's a PDF of what those posters look like if you're interested in the handout section of the GoToWebinars again. So before I go too much further, I want to introduce Chris, who is the star of our show today. Chris is Chef Chris Parker, has been the sales director and corporate chef for Mercer Culinary since 2012. Prior to joining Mercer, he worked in a restaurant in New York City and in his hometown in Cincinnati. He graduated from the Midwest Culinary Institute at Cincinnati State. So thank you for joining us today, Chris.
Very pleased to be here.
So before I hand over everything to him and kind of let him go through these demonstrations, I did want to explain the outline for today a little bit. So Chris will be starting with a PowerPoint where he put together some really great information about techniques. And that PowerPoint will be kind of the dominant thing that you can see with Chris in a smaller slide as you see now. And then once he gets to really the heart of that hands-on stuff, the PowerPoint will get small or disappear on your screen depending on settings, but that entire PowerPoint is also available for you to see again and keep in the handouts on the side of the GoToWebinar bar. So that handout will be available to you to download and look at, just to let you know. So if the sizing gets weird at all, that is what you can expect. And Chris will be presenting for about 40 minutes, different techniques and different information. And then at the very end, we will be doing a question and answer session. So if you have any questions throughout, please put those in the chat box, and then I will voice those questions to him at the end of the session. But please do utilize that, throw in any questions. As I said, he's an amazing expert. I'm sure any recommendations or questions you have, he'd have some really great insights on. So utilize that, and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Chris to get talking about knives.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to be here with you today. We are so thankful for our partnership with NASCO. They are, as you know, one of the best suppliers to classroom supplies out there. And so it's Mercer's pleasure to be here to be able to present this information to you regarding knives and some of the different tools that we have featured on their website. Mercer is a family-run company. We're based out of New York, and we've been one of the dominant suppliers into culinary education for a long time. So this is perfect for what we offer. We want to make sure that you have some follow-up and supplemental tools to make sure your classroom gets the best instruction that they can with what we think are some of the best priced and quality tools out there. To get started, we'll go over the topics that we want to cover today with our presentation. There are three main topics that I'd like to walk through with you today. First, we'll talk about some general knife information, talk about the different types of knives that Mercer manufactures and that exist out there in the market, some of the different blade shapes and styles that exist in their tasks, and then also the different parts of the knife. There's a PDF that we've shared with that. It's fairly useful little tool to have for the classroom, so I'll walk through that with you. From there, we'll move on how to care for our knives, primarily talking a lot about honing and sharpening our knives. There's two different techniques that we're going to work with, and I'll show you the tools that we'll use to do so. And then last, we'll wrap up with some of the other tools that we have for learning in the classroom. We have some specific tools for culinary education to help your students practice and master their knife skills while they're with you. And then as she mentioned, we will be wrapping up with some Q&A at the end, so feel free to jot down anything you have. I'll address some common questions that I get throughout, but if you have anything specific, please share. That always makes this a more interesting and enriching conversation when we get a chance to talk with you with your questions you have for your classroom. So we'll get started here. So the first thing that I want to talk about are the two main types of knives that Mercer manufactures and the types of knives you would see in general commercial food service type cutlery. So first and foremost is what is known as a forged knife. I have an example of that here. This is our Genesis line of forged cutlery. You can look more closely at these items on either the Nasco or Mercer Culinary website. That's always there for your review. But in general, when we talk about forged cutlery, we're usually talking about a knife made from one piece of high carbon stainless steel. So in this particular case, we're using a German stainless steel for this knife. So from the tip of the knife blade all the way down to the butt end is one complete piece of steel. These knives are manufactured individually one at a time in our factory. It's a heavier, higher quality item. It's a little pricier than some of the entry-level knives out there, but these are the type of knives that, if properly cared for, will last for a very long time. So this is by far our most popular knife with our culinary school accounts. We work with many of the culinary programs across the United States, whether it be the CIA or many of the community college and other specialty programs out there. And this tends to be the most popular forged chef's knife that we put in those kits. So if there's anyone out there who went to culinary school and has some Mercer knives, this should look pretty familiar to it. The other interesting thing and unique thing about this knife, particular line, the Genesis, is the handle itself. So it's made out of a material called santoprene, which is a rubber tacky material. So when you use it, you get a really sure grip on the blade because you have this this rubber material as opposed to a hard plastic or other type of handles. So it really inspires a lot of confidence when you're using this particular knife. But in general, as far as forged knives go, again, you're looking for one piece construction, the knife to have a full tang, which is the portion of steel that extends into the handle, and generally a heavier, higher quality steel, so the blade edge will last for longer. We make a couple of different types of forged knives. We also have what's known as our zoom line. I know it's probably a little bit hard to see. This is sort of a straight pommel type handle if you're into the Japanese style cutlery. And then we also make what's known as our Renaissance line, which has the very classic through-riveted handle with the exposed full tang. So we make a few different types of forged knives, but by and far our most popular and most best priced one is the Genesis cutlery. So the other type of knife out there, and this is the most popular knife for commercial food service, is what is known as a stamped knife. So a stamped knife is generally made in more of a mass-produced fashion than a forged knife. So when we say stamped, we're usually talking about a knife that's cut out from a large sheet of steel and stamped out many pieces at once so that you can produce a large amount of cutlery in a short time at a lower cost. There isn't necessarily anything wrong with this cutlery, but because of that construction process, it tends to be a little thinner and lighter than the forged knives. In the case of ours, they only have a half tang, so the portion of steel only extends about halfway into the handle. And so we were able to sell something that's still good quality, high carbon, in our case, Japanese stainless steel, but at a significantly lower price point. So if a forged knife is anywhere from $60 on up, stamped knives tend to be $20, $25, $30, depending on who's making it. So it is more of an economical item, an entry-level price point. In the case of ours, as I mentioned, we use a Japanese stainless steel, so very sharp out of the package, takes and holds a nice edge, easily able to be resharpened. And then the handle is a two-piece handle made of that same santoprene that I mentioned before, that rubber material, so you get a really sure grip on the blade, and then also a high-impact polypropylene plastic. And we have recently made it a modification with these knives, an improvement. We've added little textured finger dots to the rubber portion, sort of like the surface of a basketball. so it even gives even better, more sure grip. So this is a modification that we'll be rolling out in all of our cutlery. So if you do have any of this in your classroom and you buy something new, be on the lookout for that update that we've made to the knives. So those are the two main types of knives: forged cutlery and stamped cutlery. Again, forged cutlery is a higher quality material, made usually individually one at a time at a higher price point, will last a long time. Stamped knives tend to be high carbon steel, produced in a more of a mass-produced, economical fashion, perfect for outfitting a kitchen at a lower price point. So moving on from there, I did want to briefly go over the anatomy of the knife, the different portions of the knife that we have. As I mentioned, this particular PDF is available. So this is a great resource for your classroom, the first few weeks of class when you're talking about the various tools in the kitchen. We do have this as something that you can learn so your students are aware of there. So briefly, just to kind of give you a refresher for those who are maybe have had quite a long summer break and ready to get back to the classroom. So our pieces of the knife, we have the spine here, which is the portion of steel on the top of the blade, the tip of the blade itself here at the very end, the blade, the cutting edge of the knife. For a forged knife, you would see what is known as the bolster, which is this portion of steel here at the collar. For most of our knives, we use what's known as a short bolster. For some teachers, you're probably familiar, there's different styles that are made with a heavier drop bolster, where the portion of steel extends further down. But in the case of most of our forged knives, we use a shortened steel bolster for that. And then obviously you have the handle of the knife, the blade itself, and then for some knives, either a full tang or a half tang. But most quality knives will have some sort of tang to give the knife balance and also to make sure that it's a quality construction so it doesn't break or fall loose of the handle. And so in the case of our stamped knives, we use a plastic overmold so that the plastic actually fits into holes that have been drilled into the handle. So there's no real way for the knife to separate from the handle unless someone has actually tried to physically break or manipulate it. And in my experience, we've never had an issue where a knife handle has failed being properly used. So as I said, those anatomy pieces, you can use that PDF for your own use in the classroom. So moving on from there, this is really what I was excited to talk to you all about today. I want to give you some in-depth demonstration, and I think we'll have the camera zoom in on me, make me a little bit larger. So I want to talk to you at length about honing versus sharpening your knives. These are really important techniques. If you're going to invest a lot of money into cutlery, you want to make sure that you and your students can properly care for the knives, keep them sharp so that they perform the way that they're designed to. So we're going to walk through both honing versus sharpening. These are base ways to get your knives to cut better and to perform better in the classroom and in general. And there are two different techniques that do two different things. So it bears diving into them a little bit more deeply. So first off, we'll start with the process of honing your knives. So when we talk about honing your knives, that is the process of making sure that the edge is as straight as possible. So if you saw on that handout, an ideal edge of the knife is a straight edge like that. It comes to this perfect peaker point. That is optimal. We get maximum cutting output pressure when we're slicing or chopping. That's what a really sharp knife, you'll feel it slicing cleanly through food, and that's what we're looking for. Now, as most of you have probably known, if you've used knives for a while, over time, as you're cutting, slicing, chopping knife on a cutting board, the edge will have a tendency to sort of roll over. It will get out of alignment, as you can see from that image. That's when you have to push harder to cut through food, and it potentially can cause you to slip and hurt yourself. So the first thing that we want to do to keep our knives in tip-top shape is actually go through the honing process. That is to physically realign the edge of the blade back into proper positioning. So the tool that I'm going to use for that is what is known as a honing steel. You've probably seen this. You may have one or two of them floating around your kitchen. We want to make sure that you know how to use this tool properly. So let me just make an adjustment on my screen so you can all see me. I want to make sure that everybody is there. You can see me. Good. All right. So the honing steel here is what we're looking for when we do that. Now, you've probably watched some cooking shows in your time. You may have seen different chefs or celebrity chefs or whatever use honing steels many different ways. You may have your own technique for using it. A lot of people, you see them go 90 miles an hour with a knife across the surface of the steel, and that makes for good television. But as we're trying to educate our students to make sure they do a good technique and use it properly, I like to adjust it a little bit. So the way that I like to use the honing steel, especially when I'm educating.
Before you start demonstrating, will
Yes.
you stop sharing your screen so we can have your view be big again?
Yeah, of course. So what do I need to do?
upper right-hand corner.
Yeah.
You want to stop sharing your screen.
Got it.
There we go.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries. That way everyone can see your great techniques.
Perfect. All right. Everybody can see me. It's good. Nice and big.
Yep. You look good.
So the technique, as I mentioned, is we want to make sure that we hold it a little bit differently as we're educating. So I like to hold it down against a cutting board. So you can't quite see it, but I have a hard plastic cutting board here on a sturdy surface. And that is the way that I like to do that. I do that for a few reasons. Number one, it's a safety thing. So that when I use the steel, if I go and slip, I go into the cutting board, there's very little chance that I hurt myself or someone else around me. If you're using the steel out in front of you and you slip, even in a socially distanced kitchen, there's potential for someone to hurt them, other student around them. We obviously want to avoid that. So number one, the big one is safety. Number two, when I hold the steel like this, I get a nice sure grip on there. It's not going anywhere. The steel is nice in place. It's not going to move around on me. If you hold the steel out in front of you, it takes very little force to push the steel out of alignment, which can mess with your blade angle and can give you bad results for the actual honing process. And then three, and I think probably the most important, is the ease of doing this. So it may not be super easy, and I'll kind of come a little closer to the camera so you can see me, but when you hold the steel like this, it's very easy to see the knife angle that you're trying to use. So if you practice this yourself and you try that, you'll see that it's a lot easier to see the angle of the knife on the steel itself, as opposed to when you hold it out in front of you, you kind of got to cock your head back. It's not super accurate, and it can lead to, again, inconsistent results, which is not what we want. So our biggest goal with this is when we start this process is to make sure we have consistency with the knife angle on the steel. All right. So the optimal angle for us to be using is somewhere around 20 degrees, more or less. And so 20 degrees, I can tell everybody that. We can all nod in agreement. But the reality is that if you're not familiar with that, it can be hard to find that, especially if you're trying to tell students. I'm sure everybody would love to get the protractor out and go through a lesson on that. But for the sake of time in the classroom, I've got a different way of showing it so that you can do it easily and quickly, and it's an easy way for students to memorize that. So the way that I do that is I'm going to set, again, my steel against the cutting board straight up and down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to rest it 90 degrees or perpendicular to the knife steel. All right. So what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to imagine that I have myself a quarter of a circle. So if I go from 0 degrees or flat with the knife against the blade, pull it out 90 degrees perpendicular to the steel. All right. So after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that quarter circle that I just drew, and I'm going to cut that circle in half. So now I'm at about 45 degrees. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that circle in half again. So if you do the math on it perfectly, you'd be right at 22.5 degrees, which is very close to 20 degrees. 2.5 degree slice of pie is a very, very thin one. So that's the general premise of that technique, is to go from 90, cut it in half, to 45, and then cut it in half again to right around 22.5 degrees. 22.5 degrees is right where I want to be when I use the knife on the steel. So again, one more time, just so you can see it. I'll come in a little bit closer. I appreciate everybody bearing with me. Technology, laptop cameras are not the best, so thank you very much if it's not optimal to see. But anyway, so 90, halfway, halfway again. Again, right around 22.5 degrees, somewhere in that general ballpark. That's where we want to be. So once we've found that angle, 90, halfway, halfway again, I'd like to move the knife down to the butt end or heel of the blade towards the bottom. And I want to pull down and towards myself across the steel in one smooth motion, just like this. Just like that. So again, 90, halfway, halfway again, down and towards myself, nice and smooth. I'm using a medium amount of pressure. I'm not putting my full body weight into it, but I'm also not just letting it slide across there without any force, just a general steady pressure, moving the knife down the length of the steel as I go across there. So that's one side. So in this case, I'm left-handed, so the plain side of the knife is facing up. So what I need to do is I now need to do the other side with the logo facing up. So I go plain side, flip the knife over. So now I have logoed side facing up, and I do the exact same thing on the other side. So 90, halfway, halfway again, down and straight, just like that. So I bring the whole technique together. I'm going to do one side, and then I'm going to do the other side. Now I have a lot of experience doing this, so I have the muscle memory dialed in. If you don't quite have that, it's always good to set yourself up every time you're doing it So if you don't feel confident, especially on the other side, just set it up again, go 90, halfway, halfway again, nice and straight, just like that. So this technique, especially if you're practicing with your students, getting them to learn how to do this properly, this will be really helpful for them to be able to keep the knives in tip-top shape. So again, 90, halfway, halfway again, just like that, down and straight. Down and straight, down and straight. About 4 or 5 times on each side, and you do that. And so one of the questions that I get asked a lot is how often should you use the honing steel? And so the question to that one is as often as you need to. As you saw, what we're doing essentially is we're realigning this edge. So we're just physically manipulating the edge of the knife steel. So you can't really overdo this. The only thing that you can do improperly with this is if you tend to favor one side over the other. Let's say you do 7 or 8 or 9 strokes on one side, but you only do 1 or 2 strokes on the other. You can develop a little bit of a burr, which if you've ever used a knife and you've cut into something and it sort of wants to fade one way or another, that usually has a little bit of a burr to it. And that's usually because one side has been sort of pushed out of alignment. So the biggest thing is to make sure is that you're doing a consistent, even number of strokes on each side of the blade. All right. So obviously, if you have any questions about that, feel free to enter them into that one. But I'll come back to that again. I just want to move on from there. So that is the honing process. Again, something that we need to do on a regular basis to keep our knives sharp and aligned. Now, the other thing that we're going to need to do with our knives over the long haul is actually sharpen the knives. So where honing the knives was adjusting the edge, physically manipulating the edge, the process of sharpening is actually physically grinding the steel to expose a fresh edge. So if you see on the graphic there, over time, as knives get dull, the edge of the blade goes from being this perfect peak to more of a rounded valley top. And when that happens, you can't use the steel because you can't really manipulate the top of a smooth surface, right? It's smooth. There's no edge to point or straighten out. So once that edge gets nice and gets rounded and dull like that, you need to use a sharpener. And so I put a little bit of enrichment in here. I know your students always love doing a little bit of math, but I wanted to give them a really basic equation so they can kind of understand the physics of what's going on when we are cutting or slicing a knife. So you see there on the bullet points about the third one down, I included the sort of general idea of how a knife cuts. So the output pressure, which is the act of cutting, is defined as the amount of downward force that you use, how far you're pushing into the item that you're cutting, over the actual surface area of the blade itself. And so that is an inverse relationship. So the idea is that if you have a knife edge that is, say, 0.1, and you use a force of 5 divided by 0.1 is 50, you get a good clean cut. Over time, as the surface area of that knife increases, the output pressure goes down. And so to make up the difference, you have to push harder. You have to increase the force to make that difference up. And as you probably know, those who've been around the kitchen for a while, that's when you have issues, is when you've got a dull knife, people are pushing really hard into it. Either they're smashing or squishing the food that they're cutting, but more importantly, they potentially can lead to slips and cuts and gouges. So the verbiage, the phrase, a sharp knife is a safe knife is really true in our kitchens because with a dull knife, you don't really know how it's going to cut or slice because that surface area has increased to the point where you have to use a great deal of force to get that output pressure that you would using very little downward force with a very sharp knife that has a very small surface area. So if anybody has questions about that, I love talking about that. It's kind of nice to conceptualize what's actually happening with that. And so we can certainly answer questions about that at the end if you want. But I always get a few groans from students when I talk to them about that. And I pull out the whiteboard to do some basic math with them. But it's good to get their their noodles turning when it comes to those sort of things. So anyway, moving on, I want to talk about the tools that we'll actually use to sharpen our knives, to grind or polish the blades and expose a fresh edge. So I brought a few of them here so you can see them. So first and foremost, this is a sharpening stone. If you're familiar with this item, this is either a natural mineral or a machine-made stone. It's an abrasive stone. This will grind or polish steel away from the edge of the knife. So a lot of professional chefs in kitchens will use some kind of sharpening stone. This requires a little bit more technique, but you have a lot more control in the sharpening process. So depending on your skill and comfort level, this is a great thing to explore because you can put a razor edge on your knife with a sharpening stone, but as I said, it requires a little bit of technique and skill, but I'll walk through that with you today. I also have a couple of automatic manual sharpeners as well. So these are two of what we call our pull-through sharpeners. And so what I've got here, this is what's known as the Mercer double diamond sharpener. This is a two-stage sharpener. So stage one is a coarse one for reshaping or reprofiling the knife's edge. And then stage two is more of a honing or aligning one. So it finishes it, puts a nice edge on there so that you're ready to go. These are great, especially for the classroom where the students are. If it's the first time ever picking up a knife, they want to learn how to do it. This is a great tool so that your knives stay in good shape. There's not issues with cuts or problems there, and there's no skill required to use it. So all you do is essentially you drop the knife into stage one and you pull through. So I'll do it without talking so you can hear it. You can actually hear the grinding action of the knife against the abrasive wheel on the inside of the contraption. So you hear that grinding noise is actually the carbide wheels, the abrasive wheels, pulling steel or polishing steel off the knife to expose a fresh edge. So I'll do 1 or 2 pulls through here. Depending on how dull your knife is, you'll need to do 1, 2, 3, 4. You can kind of tell based on how much sharper it's getting, but you'll do that. And then the same thing on the other side, the finishing side, and you can hear how much smoother and finer it is compared to the first side. So it's much smoother and finer. It's polishing that knife edge, putting a really nice sharp edge back on it. So these are great for the classroom. They're very lightweight. They're pretty sturdy. You could drop this on a floor. There's no real moving parts to it to get damaged. And these are on the Nasco website. So this is a great tool for the kitchen. And if you ever have any internal issues, this is a pretty hollow handle, so you can drill through this and put it on a chain if you need to affix it to a surface for a sharpening area. So you have that. So this is a great item for that. We also make a pocket version of this. So you've probably seen something similar to this on different websites or whatever. These tend to be fairly inexpensive. We also make one as well. These are great. You know, they're low cost enough that you can almost give them out to the students, tell them it's theirs for the semester or whatever, or keep it on each station. And so while the price is low, the construction and the materials itself are actually good quality. So the coarse side is a good quality carbide material. It's nice and strong and abrasive. So it's designed to pull the knife through at 20 degrees. I know it's hard to see that, but essentially there's a V-shaped notch in there. So it aligns it at 20 degrees on its design. So there's a coarse side there. And then the other side is a fine side, and those are actually ceramic sharpening rods there. So ceramic is a great tool to use to put an edge back on your knife. And all you do again is just drop it and pull it through. So you can hear the knife moving through there. It's a really good quality item as well. So again, low cost, but a good item for what it is. And then last up of our heavy tools, we do have an electric knife sharpener that we make available. These are really designed for high volume facilities, so they may not be appropriate for your kitchen, but I just wanted you to see what all is available out there. So this is a heavy duty unit. This is actually electrical, so it's powered with spinning wheels. So the wheels get a good RPM to them. And this is a 3-stage unit. So the first stage is a coarse one. This would be for something that actually can see physical damage. If the blade has got marks or scratches or dings in the blade, I would start with stage 1. Stage 2 is more of a medium stone. And then stage 3 is a fine ceramic one for polishing the knife back up. So these knives, they work very easily. They have 2 notches to them. So you can see that the blade drops into each of those notches to do per side. And these are also very easy to use. So you essentially drop the knife in, wait till you hear it start grinding, and just pull through about 1 inch per second. Just like that. Same thing on the other side. So you can see it's very easy to use, no problem there. But again, these are really designed for a heavier duty kitchen. So unless you have, several hundred students in your home ec program and you have dozens and dozens of knives to sharpen, you may not need something that intense. But I did want to go back to the sharpening stone, because this is something that is really good for students to develop their skill with sharpening, especially if they do want to go out and work in professional kitchens. So bear with me a second. I'm going to tilt this camera down a little bit just so you can see me a little bit better, so you can show you how the process of this works. So this is, in this case, this is a water stone. I'm sorry if you can't see my face, but the stone's more important here. So just focus in on that. So the stone itself needs to use some kind of liquid lubricant on it. So in this case, I would be using water for these. It's good to check with your manufacturer if you do them, but if you do buy Mercer sharpening stones, we recommend using water for them. So what I would do is I would soak this for 10-15 minutes. It's a porous material, so essentially until it stops bubbling, that's when it's ready for use. And so that's how we would get it ready. And then it's also important to note that these are graded. So I can't see if you can quite tell, but we do a 400 and 1000 grit. And then we also manufacture a 1000 and 3000 grit. So those numbers correspond just like sandpaper. That is to say, the lower the number, the coarser the stone or the rougher the material, the higher the number, the finer the stone or the more better polish it's going to put on a knife. So in general, with knife sharpening, if you have a tri-stone in your kitchen, you're probably familiar with the coarse, medium, fine side. Same idea here. The lower the number, the coarser the stone, the higher the number, the finer the stone. So we work on that same continuum of coarse to fine when we do that. So we have a sharpening stone here. I'm going to walk through techniques of using that. And then one of the other products that we make is very useful is this knife guard, this knife guide, if you will. What happens with this is essentially it's training wheels for the knives. So you just clip it right onto the back of the knife, and then it helps guide you with the sharpening process. It's got a triangular shape here, so it sits right on top of the stone. It helps guide you through that. So it's a great way to get started if someone wants to practice this. It's a very low cost item, be able to put that on there. So if you will use your imagination with me, imagine I have soaked this stone in water. I'm ready to go. I will continually add water to it as I am sharpening it. And the technique for this, because I have this guide on here, it makes it really easy. Essentially, I would just move the knife across just like that, and the guide helps keep everything nice and straight. So it's a really simple, easy tool to use. Just set it on the back, pull it just straight across there. Now, if you want to really get into the technique of doing it freehand, the nice thing about it is the technique is essentially the same as using the knife steel. So you get to practice both, and one translates directly into the other. So technique is the same: 90, halfway, halfway again. That same, they're about 20-degree angle on the knife stone, the same as you put it on the steel. And in this case, I want to use the entire length of the stone to sharpen the entire length of the knife. So I set myself in position, and I move straight across, making sure I use the whole length of the stone across there. Those of you who worked in professional kitchens have probably seen some house sharpening stones that look like skateboard half pipes, usually because the cooks tend to hang out right in the middle there, and so the center part wears faster than the rest of the stone. But because you want your stones to last a long time, I highly recommend practicing and developing with your students, making sure they use the entire length of the stone to sharpen the entire length of the knife. So it helps you do that. So same concept. I want to use 4 or 5 strokes on one side to sharpen one side of the knife. So in this case, I've got the logo facing up. And then the other time I want to flip it over. So I have the plain side up. I need to do the same thing. So same idea, 90, halfway, halfway again. Nice and straight, just like that. 4 or 5 strokes on each side of the knife, giving us really good results. So that's one side. And then again, to continue on this progression, I would need to flip it over and then use the medium side to continue on through this. So that is the general technique for that. So there are a lot of references and resource materials for using sharpening stones online. I have a video that I produced a few years ago. It was at Miami-Dade College in Miami. So you can look that up. We can find a link to that. If not, there's a lot of YouTube material out there for using sharpening stones. So questions about that you want to get into nuts and bolts at the end, we certainly can. But before we wrap up here, I do want to go over some of the other tools that Mercer has available on the Nasco site to help you with your learning and your practicing your skills. So to move on from there, sort of get into the other things, is one of our most popular tools is the Mercer cut rulers. You may have seen these in some of your kitchens if you've inherited any kitchens before. These are really popular items that we do a lot with. So essentially what they are is it's a stainless steel cut ruler, and there are each of the respective classic cuts that have been cut through there. So a student can work on their julienne and they can drop it right through to make sure they get their sizing right. I make this in 2 different sizes. This is a large one and then a small one. This one is, I think, 5 by 11 or 5 by 12, and this one is 3 by 5. So it's perfect for putting there. This obviously you can clip it into a binder. This has a hole to hang or whatever you like. This one has all of the basic cuts on there. It's very useful with a few conversion charts on the back as well. So that's one of our more popular items for the classroom. If you've been on the Nasco website as well, you've probably seen we also have 3D models that we sell there. Those are very useful. Essentially, it's a 3D shape of each of the respective cuts so your students can visualize it, put it out as reference in the center of a table, and they can work on their cuts right there without having to waste a lot of food getting to where they want to be. So that's a great tool that we offer. We also have a lot of cut resistant gloves. I've been wearing one today. This is a new one from us. This is a form fitting A4 cut resistant glove available in 5 sizes, extra small through 1X. It's got a nice form fit to it. Some of the cut gloves out there aren't super form fitting, so we designed one that's got some spandex built into it so it fits nice on your fingers. So we make a lot of those. We also make some different cooking implements. This is one of our best selling. This is a spatula, 8x3 spatula that we have for when you're working on the flat top or over a grill. All of our spatulas are made with 18/8 stainless steel, so they really flex where they're supposed to. They flex on the blade themselves, as opposed to the cheap ones, which tend to flex on at the handle there where they come together. So we offer a wide variety of products. If there's questions you have, feel free to reach out to the Nasco folks. They'd be happy to help you with that. We really appreciate you attending this today, and I wanted to see if there were any follow-up questions that we can go through to really hone in on this discussion.
So we have lots of questions, Chris, which is really wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing all that expertise with us. Certainly learned a lot and had a lot of really great conversation with the questions. So I'm going to start probably with, there are a couple questions about how you sharpen or hone serrated knives. So what advice do you have for that?
So there are essentially, and I have a serrated knife here so you can kind of see it. So there are 2 parts to a serrated knife. There are the actual teeth, the cutting edge of the teeth, and then the blade on the inside of it. So you can use a steel to touch up the teeth. You just move it down in the same fashion as you would with a regular steel. And then if you are, absolutely in love with your serrated knife and you want to get the inside part, the actual wavy edges, the half moons on the inside sharpened, you can find ceramic sharpening rods on like a woodworking website. We have one as part of a kit that we offer as well, and you can go through and you can sharpen each individual blade on the inside there. What I recommend though is I tend to look at bread knives as semi-disposable. So this is one of our best sellers. The teeth will stay sharp for a long time. The inside will stay sharp for a long time. But as it gets worn down over a couple of years use, if it's no good anymore, it's easier just to replace it. So I recommend buying stamped bread knives for your kitchen just because it's a little bit more challenging to sharpen them than your straight edge regular knives that you have there.
That's wonderful. And then another question that we had is, can you address the use of diamond steel knives as well?
Sure, absolutely. So actually, hang on, I have one here. I came prepared, or I did have one. Sorry, I have one. So diamond steels are a great tool to use. For those who aren't familiar with it, essentially a diamond steel is similar in shape to this item. They tend to be flat or more oval shaped on there. And essentially it has the steel material, but then it's also given a diamond powder coating as well. So it actually is kind of a 2-in-1 item, because as you're reprofiling that edge, it's also doing a light grinder polish on the knife itself. So I'm a big fan of diamond steels. They work really well because they both sharpen, polish, sharpen, and also hone or realign them. They do cost a little bit more than a regular steel, and so you just got to be aware of that. But in general, the utility of the product is excellent. So if you have one, I recommend them. And if you do buy one, the biggest thing to make sure of is that you use a clean, dry knife on there. I've found that if you have a wet blade going across there, the particulate tends to accumulate, and it can shorten both the life of the knife and also shorten the life of the steel. So clean, dry knives on your diamond steels.
Okay, and that actually segues really nicely into our next question, which is about what is the difference with using a water wet stone or an oil stone, and what
Sure.
are those benefits or drawbacks?
Absolutely. So oil stones, especially here in the U.S., tend to be a little bit more prevalent just because like Arkansas whetstones have been around for a long time. So that's a mineral one there that an oil is, that's just kind of the way that it's been done. Whereas a lot of the ones coming out of Japan and the synthetic stones, it's better to use water for them. So there's no real upside on the liquid that you use. A lot of the times I find it's personal preference. But what I will say is when it comes to water versus oil, obviously water is way less mess than oil. It's a lot easier to clean and store the stones, and it's obviously free or at least readily available. So with oil, you have to buy it, you have to maintain it, keep it up. We know we've all been in kitchen environments. Students may not be as careful as we'd like. So if the oil hits the ground and the top blows off, and then you have, 28 ounces of mineral oil all over your floor, and they get to learn about how salt helps with oil stains. So I find in general that water is less messy and less costly than oil. But as far as performance goes, there's really no difference between the two. It really is just a personal preference.
Wonderful, great. So our next question is actually about seeing the Mercer cutting ruler that you showed up close. And I have
Sure.
one of those in the studio. So I will hold that up myself so that you can kind of see up close what that looks like. So we've got, this is the larger of the two sizes that you offer.
So I'll
And
just
let
kind
me,
of walk through some of the features on there. So you can see the cuts. There is a tournée on there as well, so you can see the tournée shape towards the top, the football shape on there. There are some conversions. So a lot of your dry and wet conversion charts are on there. There are some reference points as far as storage temperatures for a variety of different types of proteins, cook temperatures for different proteins. There's a conversion chart on how to get from Celsius to Fahrenheit and back, how to measure or how to convert from ounces to grams and back. It lists some of the mother sauces out there. And then on the other side, it lists some of the NAMP primal cuts for pork and beef. It has a quick reference to the different types of knives that are used in a professional kitchen with a quick breakdown of that. There's a yield percentage line on there, essentially edible portion divided by whole times 100 gives you your yield percent when you're talking about costing and menu preparation. So your students can learn about menu cost, etc. And then there are some basic recipes for some biscuit knives. There's a basic recipe for pie dough, a recipe for pâte choux, and pasta dough on there as well. So it's fairly handy. And then you can see that there are centimeter and inch ruler on the side of it. So the large one is a very useful item just because it contains a lot of information in a small area. The smaller one contains some of the conversion items. It has the temperature one, the yield percentage, and then also some of the cook temps on there. And I think both of them are available on the website, so you can look closely at them if anybody's on the Nasco website, so you can see them more closely.
absolutely. So both this and then there's also a slightly smaller one that's available on Nasco website. If you are interested in it or if you have any questions about the products that we talked about today, please feel free to email me at engage@nascoeducation.com. And I put that in the chat box as well. So if you email that account, I'm happy to answer any product questions or send you links or kind of match up what we talked about today. And then also we've got even more questions coming in.
Please.
So another question that we have came in. Let me just pull it quick to the top. If you have any good knife lock box suggestions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe both Sanjamar, the manufacturer, Sanjamar Carlisle, and Edland, they both make boxes for knife storage. So essentially, they are boxes that you'll drop a knife into vertically. I'm not sure what's on the Nasco website if you have either, but those are good ways of keeping your knives secured. And then if you have a cage, we do make plastic knife guards that the knives fit into. So then you can lock them into a cage in your kitchen if you do that. We also make canvas rolls for our knives. And so one of the things that we do a lot is we set up custom knife kits for a lot of our college students. They have their own set of knives to go to class with, And if you wish to do the same, a good example, if you're on the Nasco site, is we developed a pastry set with them that has everything you need for a pastry class, but we make a lot of different of our knife kits available. So one of the things we do is if you know your curriculum, you know that each student or station needs a chef's knife, paring knife, a bread knife, etc. Put all those items in a roll, and then that way those items can be put in the roll and locked in a cage and stored that way. Plus the students can check them in and out so they can develop responsibility for their tools in the classroom. You know, you can't leave until your station's clean, and I got to make sure that your knife kit is checked back in with all the contents that were in there when you got started. So we find that having some kind of roll to keep everything in one place is a great way of doing that, or using a guard with a lockable drawer or a lockable cage is the easiest way to go about it.
Absolutely. And we're happy to work with any teachers who are interested in that kind of role setting, especially with our student kits, individual level student kits. One of the larger questions that came into a couple times is if we have any specific advice for working at home. And before I pitch this question to Chris, I also wanted to pull up one product that Nasco worked on really quickly in the last month or so to get ready, which is everything but the knife in a kit that students can then practice their different kind of cuts using something called Mad Matter, so that they don't have to use, you know, carrots or potatoes at home, but instead have, you know, that Mad Matter that they can practice all those cuts on, have the board, use a Google Drive, drop it off in there. We've got some video resources linked to this as well, so that it shows students kind of directly how they can use that Mad Matter in different ways. So if this is something that you're interested in, again, shoot me an email. I'm happy to talk to you more about that product, get you the videos that go along with it. And then Chris, I also wanted to share that question with you
Sure.
of, do you have any advice for kind of our blended or virtual learning atmospheres that many teachers are working in this fall?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we always wondered if online culinary education was going to become a thing, and unfortunately, it seems the universe is giving us our answers. So the way that we have seen it being done now is essentially putting together the class curriculum. So if, you know, for instance, the day is mother sauces, you're going to learn about mother sauces, then I've seen some of the colleges in particular come to mind because I just read an article about it. Dallas College, which used to be El Centro College in Dallas, has put together a basket of ingredients for their college students so that they can work on each day's curriculum. I realize for high school that may not be realistic, but I think especially by high school students living with their parents and, you know, they have some basic sundries in there, you can do videos to walk through, again, just to give you an example, the mother sauces, where a student can essentially be given a task of, okay, so we're going to make X amount of velouté today. So, you know, for sake of low cost, if you don't have chicken stock, they can use water, but you need to measure out the butter and the flour, or the fat and the flour that we're going to use to make the velouté. So you can see that they've done that. You know, they can either get a scale or, you know, use the measure on the side of the butter that usually has there, and then flour, get a scale or something like that. And then take pictures of the process. So get a picture of them, they've measured out the ingredients. We know that they know how to do the scaling and the measuring that's required. We're developing that skill. And then have them watch a video of how a chef would do that, where, you know, we work on the color of the roux. So I want you to demonstrate a light roux or white roux, a blonde roux, and a dark roux, and then have them take pictures of all of those things, and then you know, develop that. So it's not perfect. There's no doubt about that. It's very much a challenging moving target. But I would say that if you are interested in learning more, I would say talk to some of if you're familiar with any of the culinary schools, the colleges in your area. Maybe reach out to the instructors there and see how they can be a resource. I mean, those teachers are very much vested in your students' success, because they want them to come to culinary school after they graduate, but they're great educators like yourselves. They want to make sure that ultimate goal is student success. So just figuring out each measurable, actionable step in the kitchen, just like if they were there in front of you, figuring out how you can break those into pieces and then have them documented. So at the very end of the day, at the very least, they're doing the technical, tactile skills of doing that. Now, I realize that taste is an issue because you couldn't be there to be the taste. But in general, with a lot of the recipes, especially if you've been doing this for a while, you know that if they measure out all of the ingredients, including the spices and herbs, salt and pepper, etc., it's going to taste pretty close to where you want it to be because they are following that recipe. So it definitely allows you the ability to develop recipe skills. As far as helping students get those items in the classroom, I don't necessarily think there's a one size fit all. And I know there's a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds that makes it more challenging. But if you can just assume that a student has a fairly well-stocked or equipped kitchen, I'm sure you can find some basic things to help them at least do some of the basic skills they need to do that. Carrots and onions are always fairly low cost, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure that your districts are coming up with a lot of ways to get creative. I know that you have been thrust to do that as well. So I give a lot of credit to teachers right now. You are doing a really amazing job with making sure students stay educated in really challenging times. So I have a lot of respect for all of you out there because it's not an enviable thing to be doing, is to figure out how to retool your entire curriculum more or less overnight. So a lot of kudos to y'all for that, just personally from me to you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And then we also had another question come in, and I don't think that we do have the Mercer rulers in Spanish, but do you offer the rulers in Spanish?
We do. The Mercer, the large ruler is available in Spanish. We've produced it a while ago. I can get you the information on that particular item, and if anybody wants to place an order for it, you have the ability to order that item from us directly to send out to the school. So not a problem. But I do make the large size ruler in Spanish. It's all in metric on there as well. We've converted it, obviously, if you're teaching in metric, whether it's here in the US or elsewhere, but we do have it in Spanish.
Wonderful, that's amazing. Another question that we have is, which do you do first, honing or sharpening, or does it matter?
Well, it does matter. It's a great question. So honing is more of a regular daily activity, something that your students would have them do at the beginning or end of class, because we want those knives to be in tip-top shape to get started. So especially if it's a class where they're going to be doing a lot of prep, a lot of knife skills that day, probably good to put the knife on the steel a few times just so it's as sharp as it can be when class starts. And then sharpening is more of a semi-regular thing. So depending on how often your knives are being used in the classroom, anywhere from twice a month to once a month, it's really going to be based on the wear and tear on the knives themselves. But honing is something you can do on a daily basis because, again, you're just manipulating the edge of that knife. You're just moving the shape of the steel around, as opposed to sharpening, which is grinding or removing material from the surface of the knife, which shorten the lifetime of the knife. So you need to sharpen far less often than you need to hone your knives. And the more often and better care you take of honing your knives, the less often you have to sharpen because they stay in good shape and are where they're designed to be at with that blade edge. So honing is the key on this whole thing to doing it correctly, maintaining your tools, like changing the oil on your car. You do that on a regular basis, you don't have to change the engine.
And then another question kind of that's along that lines is, what is your best advice for cleaning knives and steels for longevity?
Sure, absolutely. So if you use a clean, dry knife on a steel, the only real maintenance that you should need to do is just wipe it down with a dry cloth. I won't even try and get as close as you can, but if you're familiar with a knife steel, you know that a lot of them have really fine, smooth grooves in them, and a lot of them are lightly magnetized. And the idea is that as you move down there, some of those filings will actually stick to the steel itself. So if you just wipe it down with a clean, dry towel, that's good. That's the easiest way to take care of that. When it comes to cleaning knives, so I recommend only 3-compartment sinks in the classroom. So hot soapy water, rinse water, sanitizer. I recommend when students are cleaning their knives, hold the handle, make sure they're washing with the blade facing away from them when they do that. And then to make sure they take each of their knives through each step of the 3-compartment sink and get them out of there. I know from a lot of culinary schools I work with, but it's a very easy way to lose a lot of points in the classroom if the instructor sees you drop a knife into some murky, soapy water and then walk away, because it's a huge safety risk. So I have each student wash their knives individually, or have one person assigned to wash all the knives, someone that maybe you trust a little maybe better than the other ones, but making sure they're washing them with the blade facing away from them, hot soapy water, rinse, sanitize, and then get them out of the water and out of the sink.
Wonderful. And then another question we had come in is, are all Mercer knives angled on both sides, or are some just single ground?
So the majority of our, so let me say this right. So all of our Millennia and all of our Genesis blades, the ones that you have on your website, and the Ultimate White, so the 3 knives that you have on the Nasco website are all equal sided on both sides. So that's for those knives that are available there. Now, in the larger breadth of our catalog, if you're on our website and looking at our catalog, we have two families of knives that have a little bit different angle. The first is the MX3, which is our VG10 really high-end knives. Some of those blades are 70-30. So with a German steel knife or a Western style knife, if you were to look at that, you see that essentially it's the same on both sides. So it's a 50 degree angle, or 50% angle. So they basically, it's an isosceles triangle, same angle on both sides. Some of them are 70-30, so it's a little bit narrower on one side, like that. And then I have a small selection of Asian style sushi knives that are 90-0, which is to say it's a single-sided edge. So only one side has been sharpened through them. So the technical answer is I do have them, but for the vast majority of our cutlery, the Millennia, the Genesis, most of our forged knives and our stamped knives, it is an equal-sided grind on both sides.
And then what size chef knife would you recommend for high school students to use?
An 8-inch. I find, in the past, 10-inch knives, 12-inch knives have been the norm, but because the classroom is not, male dominated as it had been in the past, I recommend an 8-inch chef's knife. This, just to give you an idea, this is an 8-inch chef's knife, and this is a 9-inch chef's knife. And so a 10-inch chef's knife is huge steel, is a huge blade. So it makes a big difference. So I recommend 8-inch knives across the board.
Will you hold those up just a little bit higher, because we could
I'm sorry, yeah, of course. So let's see. So let me do, so these are both 8-inch knives. And then this one is 9 inches. Can you see that?
Yep, that looks great. Thank you.
Yep.
Another question that came in is, what do you think about a knife block with cork? Will that dull the blade?
With cork?
Yes.
Shouldn't be an issue with knife block them. The biggest thing is make sure the knives are placed gently back in there. If they're jamming the knives in there, that could be an issue. So that would be my only concern, is making sure the knives are put back in, not being stuffed back into the guard, into the block.
Wonderful. And then this will probably be our last question today, because we're running out of time. There's just been such an amazing conversation, so thank you for that. Do you know of a universal knife cover for chef knives?
Sure. So we have something like this. This is a plastic sleeve. This works really well on any brand. So the way that it works essentially is you put the knife in and you just drop it in just like that. So that would work for my knives. Any other company under the sun, these work really well. I make them. Most of the other knife manufacturers make them as well. It's hard plastic. It's kind of pinched shut. So you just got to make sure that when you do it, you just drop it in. If you try to slide it in, it's a lot riskier to cut yourself. But these type is a low cost, easy way to do it. There's another company out there that has sort of a clamshell one that works really well as well, but they're like 4 times the price. So low cost knife guard, this is an easy way to go.
Well, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. I know that it's been extremely beneficial for myself, and I think for a lot of our attendees. We've had some really wonderful comments come in too, thanking you so much for taking the time and clearly working from home, like many of us are, finding the time and the space to share your expertise. We appreciate it.
The pleasure is mine. And if you have continued questions, please feel free to reach out to Nasco. Feel free to send anything that you have. I'd be thrilled to answer questions until I get no more. It's important to us to make sure you feel supported. We are really vested in your student success. So anything you need resource-wise, reach out to Nasco. I'll get an answer to you as quickly as I can, because I want everybody to feel like they've got all their questions answered after this. So keep them coming for sure.
Well, we really appreciate that. And just a couple quick housekeeping things before we end up. There will be that survey launching. So if you're interested in entering into the drawing, make sure you fill out that survey completely and give us some of the insights and kind of, what you're seeing as an FCS teacher. The other thing too is that this is part of an ongoing series. So please tune in to webinars again. Like I said, we generally do about one FCS webinar every other month. So we're excited to see you again. And then the last last thing that I always like to address as well is if you do need credit for professional development, in your email in about an hour, maybe a little over an hour, go to webinar, which is our platform. We'll be sending kind of this automated email, and in that email will be a certificate of completion for watching the webinar today. So you'll be able to have proof that you might need to give to your district or your state entity for continuing education credits. So that certificate is going to be emailed to you automatically in a little bit over an hour. But thank you again for spending this time with us today, and we hope to see you at another webinar.